must be something in the water in Georgia, because every time I watch a trial there, I'm shocked by what I see. And this trial is no different. Day one of the state of Georgia versus Edrick Faust was insane, to say the least. But before I get into it, I do want to say, for the people interested in watching this trial, they use all of the worst words. All of the worst words, and it could be very triggering. They're not showing any of the photos, like, of the body or anything like that, but they're very descriptive in my opinion. So I would just be cautious if you feel like you could be triggered by this type of case. Now that we've got the trigger warning out of the way, day one was a lot. As I said in my last video, the state opened with a whole lot of nothing. It felt like their opening was more to defend Chris Melton than it was to prove that Edrick Faust is guilty. It was just really weird to me. I liked the opening statement for the defense a lot more. It felt more fact-based. I was able to wrap my head around it a lot better. There was a point where Attorney Cruz mentioned a statement that Chris Melton had previously made about Tara Baker's previous sexual behavior, and the state objected to that. They said that he violated one of the court's previous ruling when he made that statement, and it was actually the DA who was arguing this, and he asked for sanctions against Attorney Cruz. Both sides had an opportunity to argue, and then the judge made her ruling. She did end up siding with the state. She said that the defense attempted to circumnavigate her ruling, and by doing so, he violated Rule 412B, which is Georgia's shield law. So she ultimately decided to sanction him. She held him in contempt and fined him $1,000, which was to be paid by 9 a.m. the next morning. So after they finished with that whole mess, the defense finished up opening statements and they went straight into witness testimony. The state's first witness was one of the firefighters who responded to the call at Tara Baker's house that day. His name was David Freeman. He says that when they got there, the front door was locked and they had to kick the door in. It was deadbolted. He says when they entered the home, he saw red glowing lights off to the side and realized that was actually the stove. All four of the eyes were turned on high, so he had to go to turn it off. And then he noticed that the knobs to the stove were all removed. They were like on the counter to the side or something. So he had to replace them or put them back on before he could turn it off. Next, they went to Tara's bedroom, and that door was also locked, so it had to be kicked in. He says they noticed that the fire was on Tara's bed. From what he can recall, when he saw Tara, she was on like the foot of the bed and her hair was intact. That was something that he pointed out. And he says that he does remember noticing the screen on the window by the back door. He said it looked like it had been tampered with, but it was not removed from the window. The state's second witness, Doug Whitehead, was also one of the firefighters who responded to the call that day. He testified to many of the same things as the previous witness, but he also testified that he believed the offender used a blanket to start the fire. They placed the blanket on top of the stove, and then once it was lit, carried it into Tara's bedroom. He said that you could see pieces of it, like a trail going into her bedroom. He also testified that when they entered the home, they didn't notice any signs of forced entry prior to them making their entry. And he also remembers seeing the window screen, but he believes it was off of the window and not on it. The state's third witness was the medical examiner who examined Tara Baker's body, and he testified about her injuries. It was a lot. He testified about the multiple blunt force injuries that she had. There were ligature marks around her neck as well as a stab wound, a lot of bruising on all different parts of her body, even the private ones. She had cuts on the back of her hands, like defensive wounds, and there was charring on the left side of her face. He said that the attack seemed very personal, and he also said that she was alive when the fire was set. The ADA, Chris with a K, he brought in a rubber knife to like demo for the jury how the attack could have happened, and the way that he showed was that the offender was behind her and he stabbed her from behind using his right hand, which is how the wound ended up on the right side of her neck. And I really didn't like that he did that. I feel like it was doing too much. He could have gotten his point across just fine without a demonstration. The jury is supposed to be made up of reasonable people, and I think reasonable people can imagine someone being stabbed. I think they can conjure that image up in their head without someone showing them. After his little demo, the state tries to introduce a bag of evidence that should contain known pubic hairs that were collected that day. And according to the defense, that bag was empty. So he objects and he says that it's not admissible. The ME is supposed to authenticate this evidence, and how can he authenticate evidence that is not in the bag? That made sense to me, but I don't know anything. I'm not a lawyer. He also uses this opportunity to enter a motion to suppress some of the other evidence, the oral swabs, because he says that they were labeled incorrectly. There were 2 swabs labeled as oral swabs and sent off to the lab. And then the lab came back and said, wait, one of these is a vaginal swab. So he finishes arguing his motion, and then the state objects, but only after the judge asks them if they want to. She does decide to both deny his motion and overrule his objection, so it can come in. On cross, the defense asked the ME about the mislabeling of the swabs, and he says it was the tech's fault. They leave the swabs out so they can dry before they put them away, because if they put them away moist, they will grow mold, which is disgusting. So when the tech put them away into their envelopes, they mislabeled them, end of story. He also says that there were no accuracy checks done. I don't know if it was ever or that day, but there was nothing done and they just did it wrong. And then Attorney Cruz decides to do a little demo of his own and show that the wound could have happened if the offender was left-handed and standing or in front of, or in this situation, it probably would have been on top of Tara Baker and stabbed from the left. It would have ended up in the same place. So I thought that was smart of him to do. Day 1 felt like it was 8 days long, okay? But we're moving on to day 2.